In the labyrinths of prehistoric caves, where time drips like water down limestone walls, something ancient stirs. Silence isn't empty here. It's dense, textured, alive. And then, on the walls, they begin to appear. Not words, not noise, but marks. Carved, painted, scratched with purpose. Simple, yes, but raw and deeply sincere. These aren't decorations. They are declarations. Testimonies from minds long vanished, yet still burning with intent. In places like Chauvet, bison charge, lion's stalk, and horse's rear mid-gallop, captured not in motion, but in meaning. Nearby, spirals pulse, grids hum with lost language. And then, the hands. Stenciled in red ochre, splayed open like a silent shout. Not random, not idle. A message across millennia. I was here. Not spoken, but touched into stone. These aren't just drawings. They're bridges, fragile but unbroken, linking the first flickers of human soul to us, here, now. Proof that even before we had history, we had something deeper, the need to be remembered. Long before civilization, before metal or myth, there was fear, and it was painted in blood and ash. The earliest cave art is not just about survival, but something darker. It shows not just what they hunted, but what haunted them. Among majestic elk and reindeer, there are twisted forms, bodies pierced by spears, limbs contorted in unnatural ways. These are not triumphs, they are traumas. In those dim-lit chambers, the first artists gave shape to pain, to terror. They carved not stories of glory, but of warning. The world then was not serene, it was savage. Beneath the stars, predators stalked, hunger loomed, and men bled. These marks on stone were more than expression. They were exorcism. A way to face the nightmare, frame it, and endure it. Before the painted herds of Lascaux, before the lions of Chauvet, there was only this: shadow, blood, and the human need to give darkness a name. Even in our beginnings, we turned suffering into story, pain into permanence. The story of human imagination doesn't begin in the painted caves of France or Spain. It begins further back and further south, in Africa. In Blombos Cave, on the southern coast of what is now South Africa, the first glimmers of symbolic thought emerge, etched into ochre over 75,000 years ago. Not animals, not hunts, but patterns, deliberate cross-hatchings, etched with focus, not flair. These weren't decorations. They were messages, marks that meant something, though we no longer know what. Nearby, shells with perforations, early beads, hint at adornment, identity, perhaps status or ceremony. Bone tools crushed ochre into fine powder, which was stored in abalone shells. These weren't the actions of beasts surviving. These were rituals of beings thinking, planning, remembering. This was soul, not instinct. And it wasn't just Homo sapiens. Other branches of humanity walked that same shore, held the same ochre, made their own mark. The mind sparked in Africa, and from there, it spread. For decades, we thought we'd been the only ones who dreamed in color, who turned thoughts into symbols. But in the caves of Spain, La Pasiega, Maltravieso, there are red ochre shapes, hand stencils, and abstract markings dated to 64,000 years ago. The shock? They predate us. These were not made by Homo sapiens, but by Neanderthals. Long portrayed as brutish and dull, they were, in fact, creators, artists. They saw the same darkness, felt the same wonder, and answered it with pigment. The spark of imagination, it turns out, wasn't ours alone. It was shared. And once it ignited, it didn't flicker. It roared to life, leaping cave to cave, mountain to mountain. Across continents, From Europe to Asia to Oceania, minds awakened. Not just to survive, but to express, to mythologize, to leave something behind. Neanderthals remind us, creativity isn't a luxury, it's a fire in the brain. And once lit, no ice age could put it out. We were never alone in that firelight. Across continents and oceans, long before nations or language, humanity shared a single canvas, the rock wall. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, hand stencils and the outline of a wild pig, rendered with surprising anatomical precision, date back 45,000 years. In Borneo, spectral cattle gaze out, their hollow eyes watching millennia pass. And in Australia's Kimberley region, ancient beings known as Wandjina stare down with timeless intensity. Across this global canvas, one theme dominates: the animal. Mammoths in Europe, lions in Africa, bison in the Americas, etched and painted with care, reverence, even fear. Yet the human form is rare, and when it appears, it suffers, speared, fallen, overwhelmed. These weren't tales of glory, but of struggle, of defeat. It wasn't man triumphant over nature, but man humbled by it. The romantic myth of the noble, peaceful primitive dissolves here. What emerges instead is raw truth, that life was brutal, beauty was sacred, and the line between hunter and hunted was razor thin. The art of the Upper Paleolithic, Aurignacian, Gravettian, Magdalenian, often stuns with elegance. At Pech Merle, horses with dappled coats seem to exhale from the stone itself. Genetic analysis confirms the details. Those spots were real. These were not imaginary beasts. They were observed, studied, revered. But nearby, the mood shifts. A crude human figure lies face down, limbs splayed awkwardly. Its torso is pierced, 5, maybe 10 times, with long, deliberate lines. Spears, perhaps. The violence is not random. Next to the figure, a strange shape looms. Bird-like, ominous. Some interpret it as a tribal marker. Others see something older, an execution scene, a message etched in blood and lime. This was more than art. It was warning. This is what happens when someone breaks the code, steps outside the law of the clan. For all their grace and spiritual depth, these people knew vengeance. They painted not just beauty, but consequence. In those cold caves, justice was primitive, but never ambiguous. In the shadowed caves near Cognac, deeper truths bleed through stone. These are not scenes of the hunt or harmony, but of violence, personal and precise. One figure, a man seemingly fused with a giant deer, staggers forward, 3 spears embedded in his back. He's caught mid-motion, frozen forever in that final fatal moment. Nearby, it gets worse. A human form riddled with lances, arms, chest, legs, no part spared. This isn't chaos, it's storytelling, intentional, painful. A murder scene carved with care, preserved not in memory, but in mineral. Why would Paleolithic people, who struggled for every meal, every fire, spend effort on this? The answer may lie in meaning. Perhaps it was a real death, a betrayal that shook a band to its core. Or perhaps it was allegory, a warning passed through generations, an ancestral myth of justice or revenge. These images speak not just to violence, but to consequence, to memory with teeth. Even then, our ancestors understood. Stories of blood have a way of lasting longest. We often picture early humans as scattered tribes, barely held together by hunger and instinct. But even in bands of 20 or 30, there were rules. There had to be. Taboos, rituals, consequences. The violent images carved into cave walls, bodies pierced, men fallen, may not depict individuals, but something deeper. Archetypes, characters in stories told by firelight. The punished traitor, the fallen hero, the outsider who broke the code. We may never decipher their full meaning, but one thing is clear. These weren't random acts of brutality. They were part of a moral order, a system, a culture that understood justice. Primitive, yes, but not without form. Each spear in the stone was a sentence, each painted corpse, a lesson. They lived by codes we no longer remember, but they mattered then as law matters now. Their violence wasn't senseless, it had purpose. In a world ruled by scarcity, survival depended not just on strength, but on structure. Even bloodshed had rules. 37,000 years ago, Europe was not crowded, it was nearly empty. Just 4,000 Homo sapiens roamed the entire continent. That's less than the student body of a modern high school, scattered across mountains, forests, and frozen valleys. The math is staggering. Only 3 people for every 100 square kilometers. Today in Mongolia, there are 200. These were small, mobile bands, 15, maybe 30 souls, moving with the herds, children clinging to their mothers, elders carrying memory instead of weapons. Organized war was unlikely, but peace? That was never guaranteed. In such tight quarters, tension simmers. Resources were few, tempers short. Jealousy over a mate, a stolen tool, a broken promise. No standing armies, no fortresses. But murder? That needed no infrastructure. Even the smallest group can fracture when emotion outweighs order. And when it did, the results were brutal, personal, and unforgettable. These weren't anonymous victims. They were family, friends. Every death left a scar, and sometimes a mark in stone. Modern anthropology has pulled back the veil on hunter-gatherer life, not through bones, but through behavior. In studying 21 existing nomadic groups, researchers found a chilling truth. Violence, when it happened, was rarely about territory or resources. It was personal. Of the homicides documented, 55% stemmed from anger, jealousy, or betrayal. Not battles between tribes, but ruptures between friends, siblings, spouses. Even more telling, 36% of killings happened within the same group, within the circle that cooked together, slept together, survived together. Only 15% were between different groups. And even then, it wasn't over land or livestock. It was over pride, over insults, over love. These were not senseless killings. They were targeted, meaningful, remembered. Just like the crude but deliberate images carved into cave walls. A man pierced by spears, a body twisted in death. These were echoes of real emotions, rage, heartbreak, vengeance, etched not just into stone, but into the psyche of a people for whom justice was swift, personal, and eternal. Not all ancient violence came from men. Sometimes it came from the wild. And when it did, nature didn't flinch. It struck back, hard. Deep in the painted caverns of Lascaux, among images of grace and mastery, there's one scene that breaks the pattern. A bison, its belly torn open, spills its entrails in unnerving detail. This isn't art. It's autopsy. Before the beast lies a man, rigid, limbs akimbo. His head is strange, bird-shaped. Next to him, a staff crowned with a bird figure. It's not a portrait, it's a story. But what story? Was he a shaman in trance? A ritual gone wrong? Was it symbolic death? A myth retold in pigment? Or something far more literal? A hunt turned disaster. The wounded animal making its last charge count. Whatever the meaning, one truth stands tall. Humans weren't always the victors. In a world of claws, horns, and teeth, the line between hunter and hunted was perilously thin. And sometimes, when the dust settled, the wild stood tall, and the man lay still. In the flickering torchlight of ancient caves, we see men not as masters, but as prey. In scenes etched into stone, bison charge, horns lowered, muscles tensed. The human figures flee, arms flailing, sometimes absurdly, almost comically. Fear, it seems, had its own grim humor. But deeper in caves like Malibu, the tone darkens. Figures emerge, half man, half beast, twisting in agony or ecstasy. Are they shamans caught mid-transformation? Or victims of visions, rituals gone too far? The imagery echoes Native American traditions. Ritual dress, spiritual fusion, becoming the animal not to hunt it, but to honor it. These aren't cave doodles. They're sacred scripts, declarations of belief, of pain, of identity so primal it blurred the human and the wild. These paintings weren't about what happened, but what mattered. They are myth made visible, memory molded into meaning. And in that meaning, in those strange, contorted forms, we glimpse something hauntingly familiar. Ourselves, still running, still believing, still reaching for something bigger than fear. At Prehistoric Shadows, we believe cave walls still speak, that a smear of ochre, a handprint in stone, can echo louder than words. These weren't primitives painting in fear. They were men and women with vision, with memory, with soul. They loved, hunted, mourned, and hoped, just like us. And above all, they needed to be remembered. Not to survive, but to matter. Their art wasn't decoration, it was declaration. A cry through time. I was here. Join us as we uncover the stories etched in darkness, long before nations, before language, before we even knew what it meant to be human. Subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows, where the past isn't dead, it's waiting.